Hi, everybody. My name is Marco Baptista. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. And it's my pleasure to be hosting this webinar that we have for preclinical requests for applications that we're doing jointly with Spinal Research that's based in the UK. Maybe before I start, just want to introduce everyone that's going to be on the call. And then I'll also just cover a little bit of housekeeping for the webinar. So I want to introduce Linda Jones, who'll be also presenting the webinar with me. She's a senior scientific director consultant here at Reeve. We also have Maria Fonseca, which is a quality of life grants program associate here at the Reeve Foundation. And Cynthia Sam, I'd like to introduce her. She's at Spinal Research, and she is a research portfolio manager. And we're very excited to be doing this jointly with Spinal Research, and we hope the webinar is going to be informative. So I'd like to just give the main reason for why we're doing this RFA. Primarily, I feel that the spinal cord injury research field has a lot of effort that is ongoing with different types of drug discovery and device development. A lot of small companies, a lot of academic groups are doing this type of work. And what we really want to ensure, both at Reeve and at Spinal Research, is that the support is there for really crucial data that needs to be generated early on in the drug discovery and device development pipeline. So the focus of the RFA is to ensure that those data sets get generated earlier than later, primarily because then down the line there is going to be a need for the data to be generated that looks at mechanism of action and looks at better understanding the therapeutic. And just before I start on this slide, housekeeping, we'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar. There is a Q&A button that if you want to put your question in, that would be great. Please note to not make any of the questions really specific to your own research, but general questions that will help all the participants that are on the call. So maybe starting with what is out of scope for the RFA, and you can see at the top right, that box right there, clinical research, full drug screens, investigational new drug and investigational
don't
device
talk, okay?
Enabling studies. Oh, Linda, I think you're not muted.
Yep.
That's what's out of scope for the RFA. What is in scope is that we're looking for new or repurposed drugs, biologics, devices that are focused on neuroprotection, regeneration, and plasticity. If you see the bullets below, you can see the things of interest for the RFA, doing in vitro work, in vivo work, assay development. Even assay development, even if you don't have a therapeutic that's lined up, I think is within scope of this RFA. If you feel that you already need to be developing early on an assay so that you can get ready to do a future drug screen, that is in scope. Proof of concept in spinal cord injury models. Looking at the dosing, the timing, non-GLP toxicity, so good laboratory practice tox would be within scope. If it's GLP tox, that would be out of scope. Primarily the reason would be the costs are a lot greater to do GLP tox. So exploratory tox would be within scope. PK/PD, looking at the pharmacokinetic relationship with a pharmacodynamic assay that's being developed, is definitely within scope of the RFA. And biomarker development that's already starting early on preclinically with an eye to how you would like to have that in the future in the clinic is within scope. Medicinal devices, medical devices in similar preclinical stages are within scope too. And phenotypic drug development and targets. Even if clearly the mechanism is not laid out, but you have a rationale of mixing the phenotype with an understanding of what are the potential biological targets that you're going after are within scope. There might be more questions about within scope and out of scope, and then definitely we can take them at the end of the webinar. Also, I just want to note before we get to the next slide that there is a general more emphasis on smaller molecules and biologics, but that is not to say that other types of therapeutics are not welcome. It's just a little easier in talking about these concepts of understanding one's therapeutic, that it's a little more centric on small molecule and biologics, but this is open to all different types of potential therapeutics. And Linda, I think I'll pass this on to you.
Great, thanks, Marco. So now for some of the boring stuff. In terms of eligibility and funding, the primary investigator must have a terminal degree, a doctoral degree or equivalent, and must be beyond the postdoctoral level and an independent investigator. We welcome PIs from academic or private institutions or companies from any country in the world. And industry and academic partnerships are actually encouraged because this sort of drug development pathway may not be well established in given labs or with given individuals. Those partnerships could be really beneficial. A single PI must be identified who is responsible for the application, communications, and research contact, although sub-investigators are allowed. And a PI may only submit one application, and one application from the same lab or company, but multiple applications can come in from the same institution. And again, as mentioned, partnerships are encouraged. The funding, the duration of the grant is 1 to 2 years. The budget is up to $250,000 in USD with a 10% cap on indirects, and those indirects are encompassed within the $250,000. Subcontracts to contract research organizations are allowed, and as mentioned earlier, even encouraged if the skill set does not reside within one lab. And you can refer to the NIH Blueprint website. They have a list of CROs that work in the drug and biologic development space that could be a useful resource. So now talking about data sharing and IP. So open data sharing of non-intellectual property is required, and a data management plan will be required at the full grant application stage. And we understand that for some companies where they're still protecting intellectual property, we'll work with you on what can be shared. But, you know, as an example, tool compounds may be something that could be publicly shared, not the compound that you're moving forward with. Any repository any repository can be used for data sharing as long as it's a FAIR repository, which stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And ODC-SCI is a great resource. This is an NIH-supported data resource that is specifically focused on spinal cord injury. And there are some fantastic tools on that website in terms of how to set up your data, data dictionaries, etc. Open access publications are also encouraged, and you may allocate funds within your budget for the open access fees. The intellectual property is held by the applicant or institution. Back to you, Marco.
Thank you, Linda. So I'll be discussing just briefly what the review process is for this RFA. It's a two-stage process. The first being a letter of intent, and hopefully this is going to be, I think, a low lift for everyone to be able to, for the first stage, to apply to us. This is due on December 12th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Then this will be triaged internally, and we'll also bring in, under confidentiality, if needed, some support from expert reviewers. And then a decision will be made on those LOIs of which ones would be invited for a full grant application. And those full grant application invites would happen early next year, with the full grant application then being due in March of 2025. Anticipated award announcements happening in June of that year, and then anticipated funding August of 2025. if you are awarded, the grants are all milestone based. So the full grant amount would not be given to you. They're based on milestone, based on payment schedules. And we do this so that we can be as accountable as possible to our donors. Linda?
So the application process, so this screen can be found on our system called Foundant that Maria will tell you about later, but there's more detail in the system. And actually, when you go into the system, there's a PDF of the application guide you can refer to, and that encompasses more details than what we have in the slides. So we have a number of fields that you can see here, the first being impact. So one should indicate how a successful outcome of the proposed plan would lead to future development efforts, and what the ultimate goals and established timeline are for moving the therapeutic into the next stage of development, and the impact for people living with spinal cord and on the field. In terms of indication, you're asked to indicate whether the therapeutic addresses neuroprotection, regeneration, or plasticity, and at what stage of spinal cord injury, so acute versus subacute versus chronic, and what the target spinal cord injury population is known as an example in terms of severity and level of injury, which may or may not be known at this stage of development. In terms of the therapeutic, a description of the therapeutic being developed, the mode of action, and how the therapeutic was identified, as well as the strengths and weaknesses of the proposed therapeutic. In terms of the target, indicating the biological target and the hypothesized mechanism and pathway proposed to develop the therapeutic, and if available, evidence of target engagement. In terms of the stage of development, you're asked to describe the current stage of development. So for example, is it high throughput screening stage, hit to lead optimization, or preclinical candidate nomination? And discuss the relevant data that has been accumulated to date that justifies the progression of the therapeutic to the next development stage. So as an example, what data has been accumulated on bioavailability, PK/PD relationships, safety, et cetera. And Marco's going to talk later about an optional appendix that may be completed by applicants in the therapeutic template profile. Marco will go into details on that later. But studies to collect the gaps that you've identified in the data can and should be proposed as part of your application. Then there is the development plan to describe and justify the studies you wish to complete to move the therapeutic forward, and how do these studies fit in the big picture of developing a therapeutic for persons with spinal cord injury. And in addition to this, there is a field not listed on the slide about the IP or competitive landscape. So we ask you to describe any IP considerations or restrictions that may impact further development. Marco, back to you.
Thanks, Linda. So in order to be transparent, we want to tell you what we're looking for with the LOI review criteria. The first one is always what's the impact on the application and the project for people living with SCI, and how it's going to move the needle forward in the field. An understanding of what the target viability is, what's the supporting evidence and the rationale for going after that biological target in spinal cord injury. An understanding of the stage of development that you're in, and what the gaps are, and what the next steps will be. And this is very important because we're not judging the applications necessarily based on how mature they might be in the field. We're really going to be judging them based on an understanding of what important next steps you would need with our funding to be able to move your program forward. The development plan, the research plan needs to be appropriate for the actual stage that you're in. So if you're optimizing, let's say, a small molecule, then the experiments need to be commensurate with that type of work. If there are any intellectual barriers that would prevent down the line something being eventually commercialize. This is not something that we would prevent an LOI from coming in, but important for us to earlier than later have a better understanding of where the IP lands with your project. And again, we don't take any IP from this, so you always have the intellectual property. And then the team, making sure that you have a diverse team, a team that can execute on the project and move it to the next stage. So this is the therapeutic template profile, which is optional, again, that Linda had mentioned. This is something that I think can be very helpful in being able to maybe self-identify what gaps you might have in your program. So, for example, you can use it to, and we encourage you to fill it out as much as you can. But if you're unable to fill it out, I think that might be saying something that you sort of need help and support with this RFA to be able to move your program forward. So an understanding of what stage you're at, an understanding if you do or do not have the selectivity data for example, for a small molecule. Is it hitting only one target? Do you know if it's hitting other targets? Maybe this is something that you would need support and would need funding to be able to get a better understanding of your therapeutic. An understanding of a pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic relationship might be something that is currently lacking, or maybe you have that information, and that would be very helpful to include. If you do have that information, the more that you include, the easier it will be for our reviewers to fully evaluate the applications. But again, this is here. It's optional. The reason it's optional is because it's probably my understanding that there might not be a lot of applicants that are going to be able to fill all of this information on this form. However, I think it's a good guide in knowing how we're thinking here at Reeve and at Spinal Research of the types of applications we want to see and what gaps that we want to help fill with our funding. Linda?
Actually, this is Maria who's going to talk about the online system.
Yes.
Okay, so all of the, you can access the LOI on our online platform, which is Foundant. You can find by following this QR code, it'll take you to the page on our website where all the information is there, where the link to Foundant is also there. We always recommend that you add administrator@grantinterface.com to your mailbox, because the emails from Foundant are coming from this email address. Each applicant should create their own account regardless of institution, especially since multiple applicants might apply from the same institution, not the same lab company. When you the system allows you to print a PDF of the questions, and you'll see that on the right-hand side. If you want to have that before, you can print it and have it there. At the end, you'll see that you can abandon your request if you're not going to proceed. You can always go back to the LOI by saving it, or you submit it. Once you submit it, you'll receive an automated email from the grant portal confirming that your submission has been received. Just keep in mind that the system closes December 12 at 5, as Marco mentioned. And if you have any questions or you have any issues starting your registration, you can always email me at fountainhelp@reeve.org, and I'll answer as quick as possible. All right, Linda, thank you.
So key deadlines, which Marco noted, the LOIs are due December 12th, 5 p.m. Maria noted this as well. Full grant invitations will be solicited in January 2025, with full grants due in March 2025. The specific dates will be provided as we get closer to those deadlines. And we anticipate announcing the grantees in June 2025 and anticipate funding in August 2025. As Maria mentioned, she is available for questions about Foundant and the process, and I am available to answer questions about the scope of this application. We strongly encourage you to read the application guide. which is on the Reeve website and available via a link to the PDF in Foundant, and encourage you to really look at this information before contacting either Maria or myself, because there is a lot of information in there. That being said, please do reach out if you have any questions. We also encourage you to begin the application process early in case there are any glitches in dealing with Foundant, and to ask any questions you might have at least 48 hours prior to the deadline on December 12th. And with that, we can take questions.
And Linda, maybe you might be able to see on your screen, but we've been answering questions online throughout. There have been some questions of, are there any geographical restrictions on applying to us? And there are not. There were questions around chronic and acute SCI, and we're open to both. There were questions if there could be any type of human work. This is all preclinical work that that's within scope. And I think there were some questions also of just the with regards, I guess, getting to the pay line or what the scope of the program is. That's still to be determined. So that's we haven't run a request for applications in a while, so we're very excited that we're doing this, and this is going to be a bit of a barometer of what we'll be doing afterward if we have a successful RFA. So excited about that, but we don't have those details yet. I think that recaps a lot of the questions that were being asked. Yeah, so we don't know how many applicants are going to be funded. There's a question here, Linda, on complications of SCI. Do they fall within the scope of funding? I believe so, as long as, you know, the application is really getting at sort of understanding the therapeutic approach in how you're going to address those complications. There's a question here also of studying drugs for secondary consequences of SCI, such as pain and spasticity. Again, yes. Would applications be accepted if they're part of a larger project program? To fund a specific aspect, such as a regulatory expert to help with preclinical packaging and regulatory approval. That I think I'd have to see. I'm not sure on that. Can you see that question, Linda?
Yes, I think it would depend on the context.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, these could be large projects, so funding a portion of them is absolutely within scope, but in terms of just funding a regulatory expert, so that might be a question you could ping us offline about.
Is the focus only SCI repair or related consequences, include such as ulcers or bladder recovery? I think that's within scope. Is it responsive to include market research to better define the potential addressable population? I think that'd be out of scope for this RFA. You mentioned that you don't know how many applications will be funded, but do you have a sense of the amount of funds potentially available? That's still to be determined. Again, you know, here at Reeve, we don't have an endowment. We're raising the funds as we go. So we have an understanding of the scope of the projects and the amount, which is listed there on the slides, but not of what the total program will be, not yet. Would device validation and stability studies be within the scope? I believe so.
I just want to go back to the question about secondary health conditions. I would say we are interested in funding research on secondary health conditions, but really focusing predominantly on plasticity, regeneration, or protection. So we might fund something that alters the bladder function, but we wouldn't, something like a new catheter would not be within scope.
Right. So another one of the Q&A. Yeah, again, we don't know what the percentage of LOIs will be to get invited or percentage for the funding. We don't know that yet. There's a question in the chat. Please explain what you mean by preclinical. So preclinical would simply mean that it is not a human clinical trial. So I guess to clarify, if you had a human cell line that you were working with, we would consider that preclinical human work. But yeah, clinical trials are out of scope. Human clinical trials. Does the therapeutic require prior publication? No, I think it requires prior publication, but the more information you can provide, the easier it will be for reviewers to evaluate.
Marco, there's a question here in the chat about the grant agreement, if it would be between the awardee and either Reeve or ISOT or a new hybrid body. And the grant agreements will be between the institution or company and Reeve /ISRT, so not a hybrid body.
Right. Can a portion of the PI salary be included in the grant? Yes. The limit, are we using the limit, Linda, of
I would follow the NIH limitations, ideally. It's not something we've discussed, but I would consider that.
Yeah. Do you welcome proposals from investigators outside the SCI field, or is it essential to include experienced SCI researchers in any successful proposal? So I'd be open for outside of the field. I think just making sure that the work that you're doing has the proper expertise. So you know, having good collaborators that can help on the SCI front, but you can be outside of the field.
We'd actually encourage people from outside the field, if they have therapeutics that are relevant to spinal cord injury, to apply. But as Marco said, working with someone with spinal cord expertise would really strengthen an application.
Yeah. So an example of that situation could be a repurposed drug, where there might be a good understanding of that drug from its original indication, but then making sure that you have a team in place that can address the SCI specifics. Just for clarification, when we're referring to clinical trials being out of scope, does this include a phase 0 and phase 1 trials in human? Correct. Both phase 0 and phase 1 would be out of scope. Any other questions? And again, you can reach out to us afterward if you want to discuss something.
Give it a couple more minutes in case something floats to the top of someone's mind.
Okay. Well, we're very excited to launch this RFA. We want to do everything that we can to really help the field and move it forward. And we're hoping this is going to have an impact. And want to thank everybody for joining the webinar. We appreciate it.
Jeff, there's a question about the slide set and if it'll be available. And yes, it can be made available, and the webinar is recorded, so it'll be available
Yes.
after the webinar is ended.
Thanks, Lynn. Thank you.